What would you do if you discovered that the three most important people in your life had been right in front of you all along, but you never knew they existed? Today's story will change how you think about love, loss, and the unexpected ways family finds us when we need it most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor as Marcus Sullivan stood motionless in his corner office, watching Chicago's skyline blur through the storm. At 38, he commanded one of the most successful tech companies in the Midwest, Sullivan Innovations. But success had come at a price he was only beginning to understand. His reflection in the glass showed a man who looked older than his years. The sharp suits couldn't hide the weariness in his dark green eyes, and the confident posture that intimidated competitors masked a loneliness that had grown deeper with each passing year. Marcus had everything the world told him he should want: wealth, power, respect, and a penthouse that graced magazine covers. Yet as he stood there watching the rain, he felt as empty as the expensive apartment waiting for him. "Mr. Sullivan?" His assistant, Jennifer Walsh, appeared in the doorway with her usual professional courtesy. "The board meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning. Your calendar is clear for the rest of the day." Marcus nodded without turning around. Clear calendars had become a luxury he couldn't enjoy. Empty time meant space for memories he'd spent 15 years trying to bury, memories of a woman whose laughter had once filled rooms that now echoed with silence. "Thank you, Jennifer. You can head home early today." His voice carried the practiced authority that had built his empire, but Jennifer had worked for him long enough to hear the strain beneath it. After she left, Marcus returned to his desk and opened the bottom drawer, the one drawer he never allowed anyone else to access. Inside, beneath legal documents and business contracts, lay a small velvet box he hadn't opened in months. His fingers hesitated before lifting the lid to reveal a simple engagement ring, the diamond modest but perfectly chosen for the woman who had valued meaning over material things. Elena Rodriguez had been everything Marcus wasn't: warm where he was guarded, optimistic where he was calculating, generous where he was careful. They'd met during their senior year at Northwestern University, two completely different people who somehow fit together like puzzle pieces. She studied social work while he pursued business. She dreamed of changing lives while he planned to build an empire. Yet for 2 magical years, they'd found a way to bridge those differences. The proposal had been perfect. A quiet moment in Lincoln Park during the first snowfall of winter. Just the two of them, and a future that seemed infinite. Elena had said yes, with tears in her eyes, promising they'd build something beautiful together. But then graduation arrived, and with it, the job offer that would change everything. Sullivan Innovations had started as a small consulting firm in Seattle, but Marcus saw potential for something much bigger. The position required total commitment, 18-hour days, constant travel, and the kind of focus that left little room for anything else. Elena had been supportive at first, encouraging him to chase his dreams while she established her career. In Chicago, they'd make it work, they promised each other. Love would be enough, but love, Marcus learned, wasn't always enough to bridge the distance between Seattle and Chicago, between 18-hour workdays and evening phone calls that came less and less frequently. The engagement stretched from months to years as Marcus threw himself deeper into building his company. Each promotion, each client, each victory felt hollow when he called to share the news and heard the growing sadness in Elena's voice. And came not with a dramatic fight, but with a quiet conversation that still haunted Marcus 15 years later. Elena had flown to Seattle for what they both knew would be their last attempt to salvage their relationship. They'd sat in his sterile apartment, the one he'd barely bothered to furnish because he was never there, and finally admitted what they'd been avoiding for months. "I love you, Marcus," Elena had said, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "I've loved you since the day we met, and I'll probably love you for the rest of my life. But I can't compete with your ambition anymore." "You're not competing," Marcus had protested, though even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. "We can make this work. The company is finally stable. I can delegate more, travel less." "No, you can't." Elena's smile had been heartbreakingly gentle. "And I don't want you to. This is who you are, Marcus. You were born to build something important, to leave a mark on the world. I see that, and I'm proud of you for it. But I need someone who can be present for the small moments, someone who wants to build a family as much as they want to build a career." They'd held each other that night, both crying for the future they'd imagined, but would never have. In the morning, Elena had flown back to Chicago, and Marcus had thrown himself into work with a desperation that finally paid off when Sullivan Innovations became the success story he'd always envisioned. But success, he'd discovered, tasted like ashes when there was no one to share it with. The years that followed blurred together in a haze of meetings, acquisitions, and achievements that felt increasingly meaningless. Marcus dated occasionally, sophisticated women who understood his lifestyle and didn't expect more than expensive dinners and charity galas. But none of them made him laugh the way Elena had. None of them challenged his thinking or made him want to be better than he was. He'd tried to find her once, about 5 years after their breakup. A private investigator had tracked her to a small social services office on Chicago's South Side, where she worked with underprivileged children. The investigator's report painted a picture of a woman who'd found her calling, making a real difference in young lives while living simply but contentedly. Marcus had driven to Chicago with every intention of walking into her office, but when he'd seen her through the window, older but still beautiful, laughing with a group of children, he'd realized he had nothing to offer her that she didn't already have. Elena had found peace. Marcus had found profits. The choice seemed clear. Now, 15 years later, Marcus stared at the engagement ring and wondered what his life might have been if he'd chosen differently. Would they have had children? Would Elena have softened his harder edges while he provided stability for her dreams? Would Sunday mornings have been filled with family breakfast instead of business reports? The questions tortured him because they had no answers, only the hollow echo of choices that couldn't be undone. His phone buzzed with a text from his current girlfriend, Stephanie Chen, a successful attorney who understood his schedule because hers was equally demanding. "Dinner at 8? That new place on Michigan Avenue?" The message was friendly but routine, like everything else in Marcus's carefully controlled life. He started to respond, then stopped. Stephanie was beautiful, intelligent and ambitious, everything he should want in a partner. But when he tried to imagine growing old with her, building something lasting together, the picture remained frustratingly blank. She was the right choice on paper, but Elena had been right in his heart, and he'd learned the difference too late to matter. The storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the city in brief, stark flashes that reminded Marcus of camera bulbs at press conferences. Tomorrow would bring another board meeting, another strategic decision, another step forward in building an empire that felt increasingly pointless. He'd revolutionized how small businesses managed their data, created thousands of jobs, and earned recognition as one of Chicago's most influential young CEOs. Yet as he sat in his opulent office, surrounded by awards and accolades, Marcus Sullivan felt like the loneliest man in the world. The rain continued its relentless rhythm against the windows, and Marcus made a decision that surprised him. Instead of responding to Stephanie's text, instead of reviewing tomorrow's presentations or checking the stock prices that had become his obsession, he closed the velvet box and locked it away. Then He grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator. Some night's success felt like a prison. Tonight, Marcus needed to remember what freedom had felt like, even if that memory came with the pain of everything he'd lost along the way. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was about to change. The storm outside seemed to be building toward something more than just rain, and for the first time in years, he found himself wondering if the universe might still have surprises left for him. He was about to discover just how right that feeling was. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the torrential rain as Marcus drove through Chicago's winding streets, his destination clear in his mind despite not having been there in over a decade. Graceland Cemetery lay on the city's north side, its Victorian monuments and ancient trees offering a strange comfort to those seeking peace among the dead. Marcus hadn't planned to end up here when he'd left his office, but his hands had guided the steering wheel with a certainty his conscious mind couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the storm, or the weight of another empty evening stretching ahead, or simply the accumulated burden of 15 years spent wondering, what if? Whatever the reason, he found himself pulling through the cemetery's ornate gates. Just as the rain began to ease, the Mercedes glided silently along the narrow roads that curved between elaborate headstones and family mausoleums. Marcus knew the way by heart, though he'd only made this journey 3 times before. Each visit had been harder than the last, which was why he'd eventually stopped coming altogether. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt necessary. He parked near the Inez Clark Monument, a local landmark that had always served as his reference point, and stepped into the humid evening air. The storm had passed, leaving behind the clean scent of washed earth and the gentle drip of water from ancient oak branches. His expensive Italian shoes squelched in the soft ground as he made his way along the familiar path, past the graves of Chicago's elite toward a simpler section where newer headstones stood in modest rows. Elena Rodriguez, beloved daughter, sister, and friend, born March 15, 1985, died September 23, 2020. The headstone was exactly as Marcus remembered it, simple grey granite with no elaborate decorations, just Elena's name and dates, along with a small engraved image of children's hands, reaching toward the sky. Below that, an inscription that had haunted him since the day he'd first read it. She lived to lift others up. Marcus knelt beside the grave, not caring about the damp earth soaking through his suit pants. The flowers he'd left during his last visit 3 years ago were long gone, replaced by what appeared to be a carefully tended garden of wildflowers that someone maintained with obvious love. Daisies, Elena's favorites, bloomed in cheerful clusters despite the late season, suggesting they'd been recently planted. "I'm sorry I haven't been here," Marcus whispered to the stone, his voice barely audible even to himself. "I'm sorry for a lot of things." The guilt that had lived in his chest for years pressed down with renewed force. Marcus had learned of Elena's death by accident, a brief mention in a business journal article about innovative social services programs. The piece had focused on a community center named in her honor, describing the work of the late Elena Rodriguez, who died tragically, young from complications related to a rare autoimmune disease. The casual mention had hit Marcus like a physical blow, the realization that Elena had been gone for months while he'd remained obliviously focused on quarterly earnings and market share. He'd attended the memorial service from the back of the packed church, watching as hundreds of people shared stories about the woman who'd touched their lives. Children she'd helped find homes, families she'd kept together, colleagues who spoke of her tireless advocacy for society's most vulnerable. Marcus had listened to testimonial after testimonial about Elena's impact, understanding with crystal clarity that she'd achieved something far more meaningful than all his business success combined. After the service, he'd approached Elena's sister Maria to offer his condolences. Maria had recognized him immediately, her eyes filling with an emotion Marcus couldn't interpret. Grief, certainly, but something else too. Anger, perhaps, or disappointment. "She never stopped loving you," Maria had said simply, her words cutting deeper than any accusation could have. "Even at the end, when she was sick, she'd talk about you sometimes. Wonder what you were doing, if you were happy, if you'd found someone who could keep up with your ambitions." Marcus had wanted to ask 1,000 questions about Elena's illness, about her life after their breakup, about whether she'd ever married or had children. But Maria's controlled grief had been a wall he couldn't breach, and he'd left with only the terrible knowledge that he'd lost Elena forever without ever knowing he was losing her. Now, kneeling beside her grave in the gathering dusk, Marcus finally allowed himself to confront the full weight of his regret, not just for choosing his career over their relationship, but for never reaching out in all those years, never swallowing his pride long enough to ask if there might still be a chance for them. He'd told himself he was respecting her choice, giving her space to build the life she wanted, but the truth was simpler and more damning. He'd been afraid of discovering that she'd moved on completely while he'd remained stuck in the past. "I built everything I said I would," Marcus told the headstone, his voice growing stronger. "Sullivan Innovations went public last year. We employ over 3,000 people. I have houses in 3 cities and more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes." He paused, the accomplishment sounding hollow in the sacred quiet of the cemetery. "But I never built what we talked about building together. I never built a family." The admission hung in the air, carried away by a gentle breeze that stirred the wildflowers growing around Elena's grave. Marcus closed his eyes and let himself remember her as she'd been in college, full of laughter and big dreams, quick to anger at injustice, and even quicker to forgive human failings. She'd seen the best in everyone, including him, and had somehow made him believe he could be the man she thought he was. "I should have fought harder for us," he whispered. "I should have found a way to balance everything. I should have—" "Excuse me." The voice was small, uncertain, and definitely young. Marcus opened his eyes and turned, expecting to see a curious child who'd wandered away from visiting family members. Instead, he found himself looking at 3 children who appeared to be around 8 years old, standing together in a careful line about 10 feet away. 2 girls and a boy, all with dark hair and serious expressions that seemed far too mature. "And for their age, are you here to visit Mama Elena too?" asked the girl in the middle, her voice carrying a slight accent that reminded Marcus painfully of Elena's grandmother, who'd insisted on speaking Spanish whenever Elena brought him home for dinner. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The children were clearly siblings, possibly triplets, given their similar height and age, and while their features were their own, something about them stirred a recognition so deep it felt primal. The boy had Elena's expressive dark eyes, while one of the girls shared her delicate bone structure. But it was the 3rd girl who made Marcus's heart stop. She had his own stubborn jawline and the distinctive dimple in her left cheek that had been the Sullivan family trademark for generations. "You knew Elena?" Marcus managed to ask, his voice coming out rougher than intended. The 3 children exchanged glances with the kind of silent communication that only came from growing up together in difficult circumstances. Finally, the boy stepped forward slightly, his chin raised in a gesture of protection toward his sisters that Marcus recognized with startling clarity. It was exactly how he'd stood as a child when defending his younger cousins from playground. "Bullies, she was our mama," the boy said simply. "Not our birth mama, but our real mama. She took care of us until she got sick." The world tilted sideways. Marcus gripped the edge of Elena's headstone to steady himself, his mind racing to process what he was hearing. Elena had children, had raised children who weren't biologically hers, which was so perfectly, heartbreakingly Elena that it answered questions Marcus hadn't even known he was asking. "What are your names?" he asked gently, instinctively understanding that these children had learned to be wary of adult strangers. "I'm Sophia," said the girl with Marcus's jawline, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "These are my brother and sister, Diego and Carmen. We're triplets." "Triplets," Marcus repeated, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. He studied their faces more carefully, noting the subtle differences that marked them as individuals despite their shared genetics. Carmen was clearly the dreamer, her attention drifting to the wildflowers even in the midst of this strange encounter. Diego carried himself like a protector, standing slightly in front of his sisters, despite being no larger than they were, and Sophia watched Marcus with an intensity that reminded him uncomfortably of his own reflection in boardroom mirrors, calculating, assessing, missing nothing. "Where do you live now?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Children visiting." Graves alone at dusk suggested a situation that made his businessman's mind immediately leap to worst-case scenarios. "We're staying at St. Catherine's," Sophia replied, naming a children's home Marcus recognized from his occasional charitable contributions. "But only temporarily. They're trying to find us a family." The casual way she said it, as if discussing something as mundane as the weather, broke Marcus's heart. These children, Elena's children, were in the foster system, waiting for strangers to decide their fate while visiting the grave of the woman who'd loved them enough to call them her own. "How long have you been there?" Marcus asked. "Since Mama Elena went to heaven," Carmen said softly, speaking for the first time. Her voice was musical, with the same lilting quality Elena's had possessed when she sang while cooking. That was 14 months and 6 days ago. The precision of her count suggested that Carmen had been marking time, waiting for something or someone to change their circumstances. Marcus felt a familiar pressure building in his chest, the same driven urgency that had built his business empire, but this time focused on something infinitely more important than profit margins. "You come here often?" he asked, though the carefully maintained wildflowers had already answered that question. "Every week," Diego confirmed. "We take the bus after school on Fridays. Mrs. Patterson at St. Catherine's says it's important to remember the people who loved us, even when they can't be with us anymore." Marcus nodded, recognizing wisdom that seemed both too mature for 8-year-olds and exactly what Elena would have taught them. She'd always believed in facing grief honestly, rather than hiding from it, in honoring the past while remaining open to the future. "She used to tell us stories about her life before she got sick," Sophia added, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face, about college and the boy she loved who chose work over love. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Elena had told them about him, about their relationship, about the choice that had ended everything between them. These children knew his story, at least Elena's version of it, which was almost certainly more generous than he deserved. "What else did she tell you about him?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That he was brilliant and kind, but lost," Carmen said with the matter-of-fact honesty that children specialized in. "That he built beautiful things but forgot to build happiness, that maybe someday he'd remember what really mattered." Marcus closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the realization that Elena had understood him better than he'd understood himself, even after 15 years apart. She'd seen through his success to the emptiness beneath, and somehow she'd maintained hope that he might find his way back to the man she'd fallen in love with. When he opened his eyes, the 3 children were watching him with identical expressions of curiosity mixed with something that looked almost like recognition. And in that moment, Marcus began to suspect that this encounter wasn't as coincidental as it seemed, that Elena somehow had brought them together for a reason he was only beginning to understand. The silence stretched between Marcus and the three children as the cemetery settled into evening quiet around them. Streetlights began flickering on in the distance, casting long shadows through the oak trees and reminding Marcus that these children should probably be heading back to their temporary home. But something held him rooted to the spot beside Elena's grave, a growing certainty that this moment was more pivotal than any business decision he'd ever made. "You look familiar," Sophia said suddenly, tilting her head in a gesture so reminiscent of Elena that Marcus felt his chest tighten. Mama Elena had a picture of someone who looked like you. She kept it in her jewelry box with her important things. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. "What kind of picture?" Diego reached into his worn backpack and pulled out a small photo album, its edges soft with handling. "We brought this with us from Mama Elena's house. Mrs. Patterson said we could keep one photo album to remember her by." He opened it carefully, treating it like the precious artifact it clearly was to them. The first page showed Elena at various stages of her life: graduation photos, pictures with her sister Maria, snapshots from the community center where she'd worked. But Diego turned to the middle of the album, where a single photograph was protected by clear plastic that had been carefully taped down to preserve it. Marcus's breath caught. It was a picture of him and Elena from their college days, taken during a weekend trip to Wisconsin. They were sitting on a dock overlooking a lake, Elena's head on his shoulder, both of them laughing at something off-camera. Marcus remembered that day with startling clarity. They'd been discussing their future, making grand plans about the life they'd build together. He'd kept a copy of the same photo in his wallet for years after their breakup, only removing it when the daily reminder became too painful. "That's you, isn't it?" Carmen asked softly, her musical voice cutting through Marcus's shocked silence. "The boy from Mama Elena's stories." Marcus nodded slowly, unable to trust his voice. The fact that Elena had kept this photo, had treasured it enough to include it in the one album she'd compiled for the children she'd raised, spoke to emotions he'd assumed had died with their relationship. "She told us you were very important to her," Sophia continued, her mature tone suggesting conversations far beyond her 8 years. "She said you were the first person who made her believe she could change the world because you believed in her before she believed in herself." The words were like arrows, finding their mark. Marcus remembered those late-night conversations in their tiny dorm rooms, Elena sharing her dreams of helping children while he outlined his business plans. They'd encouraged each other's ambitions, each seeing potential the other couldn't see in themselves. It had been Elena who'd convinced him to present his first business proposal to the university's entrepreneurship competition. It had been Marcus who'd helped her research graduate programs in social work. She also said you taught her that loving someone meant wanting their dreams to come true, even if those dreams took them away from you, Diego added quietly. Marcus closed his eyes, recognizing Elena's generous interpretation of his abandonment. Even in her stories to these children, she'd painted his choice in the most charitable light possible, turning his selfish pursuit of success into a noble sacrifice. It was so fundamentally Elena, finding goodness even in situations that had caused her pain. "How long were you with Elena?" Marcus asked, settling cross-legged on the ground beside the grave. The expensive suit would be ruined, but he suddenly didn't care about anything beyond learning about these children who carried pieces of his lost love with them. "Since we were 4, Carmen replied, sitting down across from him with the unconscious grace of a dancer. "Our birth mama couldn't take care of us anymore, and Mama Elena was our social worker, but she said one day with us and decided we belonged with her forever. She fought the system for 2 years to adopt us," Sophia added, pride evident in her voice. All the other families wanted to split us up because triplets are too much work, but Mama Elena said families stick together no matter what. Marcus felt a familiar surge of admiration for Elena's fierce determination. She'd always been a fighter when it came to protecting people she loved, whether it was defending him against professors who questioned his unconventional business ideas or advocating for clients who'd been written off by other social workers. "Tell me about your life with her," Marcus said, surprising himself with how desperately he wanted to know. These children represented 4 years of Elena's life he'd known nothing about, 4 years where she'd been building the family she'd always dreamed of having. The triplets exchanged glances again, and Marcus recognized the silent communication of siblings who'd learned to rely entirely on each other. Finally, Carmen spoke up, her voice taking on the cadence of someone sharing a beloved story. "Mama Elena taught us that every day was a gift, even the hard ones. She'd wake up singing this Spanish song her grandmother taught her, and she'd make pancakes shaped like animals for breakfast. She said food tastes better when it makes you smile." "She helped us with homework every night," Diego continued. "But she'd turn math problems into games and history lessons into adventures. She never made us feel stupid when we didn't understand something right away. And she taught us about our culture," Sophia added. "Even though we're not Mexican like she was, she said every child deserves to know where they come from and be proud of their heritage. She learned everything she could about our birth family's history so she could share it with us." As the children spoke, Marcus began to see a picture of Elena's life that filled him with both joy and devastating regret. She'd created exactly the kind of home they'd dreamed about in college. Warm, nurturing, filled with laughter and learning. She'd become the mother she'd always said she wanted to be, pouring her enormous capacity for love into these 3 children, who clearly adored her memory. "What happened when she got sick?" Marcus asked gently, though he dreaded the answer. The children's expressions grew solemn, and Diego instinctively moved closer to his sisters in a protective gesture that tugged at Marcus's heart. "She tried to hide it at first," Sophia said quietly. "But we noticed she was tired all the time, and sometimes her hands would shake when she thought we weren't looking. When the doctors finally figured out what was wrong, she sat us down and explained everything in words we could understand. She promised she would fight as hard as she could," Carmen added, tears beginning to gather in her dark eyes. "But she also promised to be honest with us about what was happening. She said loving someone meant trusting them with the truth, even when the truth was scary." Marcus felt his own eyes burning. Elena had faced her final illness with the same courage and honesty she'd brought to everything else in her life, even ensuring that her children understood what they were facing together. "Did she—" Marcus had to clear his throat before continuing. "Did she talk about being afraid?" "Only once," Diego replied, "near the end when she was in the hospital. She told us she wasn't afraid of dying, but she was terrified of leaving us alone. She made us promise we'd take care of each other, no matter what happened, that we'd remember we were a family, even if we couldn't stay together." The image of Eleanor, facing death while worrying about these 3 children's future, nearly undid Marcus completely. He understood now why she'd fought so hard for their adoption, why she'd been so determined to give them stability. She'd known somehow that her time with them might be limited. "She also made another promise," Sophia said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "She said that somewhere out there were people who would love us the way she did. She said we just had to be patient and keep our hearts open, because love had a way of finding people when they needed it most." As Sophia spoke, Marcus found himself studying the children's faces with new intensity. The physical resemblances he'd noticed earlier were becoming impossible to ignore. Sophia's dimple, Diego's determined jawline, Carmen's expressive eyes, features that belonged to the Sullivan family line going back generations, but it was more than physical traits. These children carried themselves with a confidence that reminded him of his own childhood, before loss and ambition had taught him to guard his emotions. They possessed Elena's warmth and compassion, but also a steel core that Marcus recognized as his own stubbornness refined into strength. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said carefully. "Do you know anything about your birth parents?" The triplets exchanged another look, this one tinged with uncertainty. Finally, Sophia nodded slowly. "Mrs. Patterson has a file with our information. She showed it to us when we got old enough to ask questions. Our birth mama's name was Jessica Sullivan, and she was only 17 when we were born. The father's name was never listed on our birth certificates." Sullivan. The name hit Marcus like a lightning bolt, connecting dots he'd been afraid to connect. Jessica Sullivan, his own cousin, who'd disappeared from family gatherings when he'd been too absorbed in building his business to pay attention to family drama. He remembered now, vaguely, hearing whispers about Jessica's troubled teenage years, her involvement with drugs, her eventual estrangement from the family. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his Uncle Robert, Jessica's father, who occasionally reached out about family matters Marcus was usually too busy to address. This time Marcus pulled out his phone immediately, his hands shaking as he read the message. "Marcus, I know we don't talk often, but I thought you should know. We finally got word about Jessica. She passed away 3 months ago from an overdose. The authorities found her body with an old family photo that had your business card tucked behind it. They said she'd been carrying it for years. There are some things we need to discuss about her children, if you have time." The phone slipped from Marcus's nerveless fingers, landing softly in the grass beside Elena's grave. These weren't just Elena's adopted children. They were his family, his cousin's children, carrying his own DNA and the features that marked them as Sullivans. "Are you okay?" Carmen asked, her voice filled with concern as she noticed his shocked expression. Marcus looked at the 3 beautiful, brave children sitting across from him and realized that Elena's final gift had been even more profound than he'd imagined. She hadn't just raised 3 orphaned children with love and devotion. She'd raised his family, preparing them for the moment when fate would bring them together at her grave. "I think," Marcus said slowly, his voice thick with emotion, "that your Mama Elena was even wiser than you knew." The evening air had grown cooler, and Marcus noticed Carmen shivering slightly in her thin sweater. Without thinking, he shrugged out of his suit jacket and offered it to her. The gesture was automatic, protective, and it wasn't until he saw the surprised gratitude in her eyes that he realized how natural it had felt, like something he'd been doing his entire life. "Thank you," Carmen whispered, wrapping the expensive fabric around her small shoulders. The jacket dwarfed her, but she wore it with dignity, as if understanding that this moment meant more than simple courtesy. Marcus's mind raced as he processed the magnitude of what he'd discovered. These weren't just Elena's beloved children. They were his own flesh and blood, his cousin Jessica's triplets, carrying the Sullivan genes and the family traits he'd assumed would die with him. The irony was almost too much to bear. He'd spent 15 years building an empire while believing he'd have no one to leave it to, never knowing that his legacy was being carefully nurtured by the woman he'd lost through his own choices. "We should probably head back soon," Sophia said, checking a small digital watch that looked like it had been a cherished gift. "Mrs. Patterson expects us back by 8 o'clock on weeknights." The mention of their temporary guardian snapped Marcus back to the present reality. These children, his children in every way that mattered, were living in a group home, waiting for strangers to decide their future, while he sat in his empty penthouse contemplating his loneliness. "Sophia, Diego, Carmen," Marcus said slowly, testing how their names felt on his tongue. They felt right, like words he'd been meant to say his entire life. I need to tell you something important about who I am, and why meeting you tonight might not be as much of a coincidence as it seems. The triplets sat up straighter, their identical expressions of cautious hope breaking Marcus's heart. These children had learned to be careful with their trust, to protect themselves from the disappointment of adults who made promises they couldn't keep. "My full name is Marcus James Sullivan," he began, watching as recognition dawned in Sophia's sharp eyes. "Jessica Sullivan was my cousin, which means you're our family," Diego said quietly, his protective stance relaxing for the first time since Marcus had met them. "Our real family?" "Yes," Marcus confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're my family. You've been my family this whole time, and I never knew." Carmen pulled his jacket tighter around her shoulders, and Marcus saw tears beginning to track down her cheeks. "Does this mean we don't have to be split up? Mrs. Patterson says most families only want one child, not three." The casual way she accepted the possibility of being separated from her siblings nearly destroyed Marcus's composure entirely. He'd grown up as an only child, always wondering what it would have been like to have brothers or sisters. These three had each other, had formed an unbreakable bond through shared loss and uncertainty, and the thought of anyone trying to divide them filled him with protective fury. "No one is splitting you up," Marcus said with the same firm certainty he used in boardrooms when making non-negotiable declarations. "Ever, I promise you that." "But you don't know us," Sophia pointed out with the pragmatic wisdom that seemed to be her trademark. "You don't know if we're good kids or if we'll fit into your life. What if you change your mind when you realize how much work three kids can be?" The question revealed so much about what these children had experienced. Adults who'd seen them as burdens rather than blessings, who'd viewed their close bond as a complication rather than a strength. Marcus felt a surge of anger at every person who'd failed to see what Elena had seen immediately, that these triplets were extraordinary. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at you three," Marcus said, shifting position so he could meet each of their eyes directly. "I see Sophia, who speaks with wisdom beyond her years and protects her siblings with fierce love. I see Diego, who stands ready to defend the people he cares about even when he's afraid. And I see Carmen, who finds beauty and music in a world that hasn't always been kind to her." He paused, seeing how his words affected them. The way Sophia's rigid posture softened slightly, how Diego's suspicious expression began to give way to cautious hope, how Carmen's tears shifted from sadness to something that looked like relief. "But more than that," Marcus continued, "I see Elena's legacy. I see three children who learned love and kindness from a woman who believed in building families through choice rather than just biology. Elena didn't choose you despite your challenges. She chose you because she recognized something special in each of you." "She used to say that families were like gardens," Carmen said softly. "That love makes everything grow better, but you have to tend it carefully every day." Marcus smiled, recognizing Elena's gentle philosophy in the words. "She was right, and I've spent 15 years letting my garden grow wild because I was too busy building other things. But maybe it's not too late to learn how to tend what really matters." The children exchanged their silent communication again, and Marcus waited patiently for their verdict. He understood, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, that the most important negotiation of his career was happening right now in a cemetery with three 8-year-olds who had every reason to be skeptical of adult promises. "If we came to live with you," Diego said carefully, "would we still be able to visit Mama Elena?" "Every week," Marcus promised immediately. "Every week for as long as you want to, and we'll keep her garden beautiful together." "Would we have to change schools?" Sophia asked. "We finally made friends at our current school, and Carmen is in the advanced art program." Marcus made a mental note to research the school situation. His penthouse was in a different district, but money could solve most educational logistics. We'll figure out a way for you to stay with your friends and your programs. Carmen's art is important. Carmen looked up at him with surprise. You think, my art is important? I think everything about you is important, Marcus said honestly. Elena saw your potential and I trust her judgment completely. If she believed in your art, then I know it must be extraordinary. What about our stuff? Sophia continued her practical questioning. We don't have much, but we have some things. From Mama Elena, that we can't lose. Everything that's important to you is important to me, Marcus assured her. We'll make sure you have everything you need, and we'll find special places for everything that connects you to Elena. Diego stood, up suddenly, brushing grass from his jeans with nervous energy. Can we think about it? Mrs. Patterson says we should never make big decisions when we're emotional, and meeting you tonight is pretty big. Marcus felt a swell of pride at Diego's mature approach to such a life-changing situation. These children had been forced to grow, up too quickly, but they developed wisdom and judgment that would serve them well throughout their lives. Of course you should think about it, Marcus said, standing as well. This is the biggest decision of your lives, and you should take all the time you need. But while you're thinking, I want you to know something. He knelt down again, bringing himself to their eye level. I came here tonight feeling lost and alone, wondering if I'd wasted my life chasing the wrong things. And then I found you, Elena's children, my family, the missing pieces I didn't even know I was looking for. You've already changed my life just by existing, just by being the remarkable people Elena raised you to be. What if the paperwork is complicated? Sophia asked, ever practical. What if the courts don't think you're suitable because you're single and work all the time? Marcus smiled at her astute assessment of potential obstacles. Then I'll learn to work less and live more. I'll hire the best family attorneys in the country if necessary. I'll do whatever it takes, for however long it takes, to bring you home where you belong. Home! Carmen repeated the word, like she was tasting something sweet. We haven't had a real home since Mama Elena got sick. Then let's build one together, Marcus said. A home where Elena's memory is honored, where your art covers the walls, where Sunday mornings are for family breakfast instead of business reports, where love gets tended like a garden every single day. As if summoned by his words, a gentle breeze stirred through the cemetery, rustling the wildflowers on Elena's grave and carrying the faint scent of the jasmine perfume she'd always worn. Marcus looked down at the headstone and felt, for the first time since learning of her death, not just grief, but gratitude. Elena had given him everything, her love during their college years, her forgiveness for his choices, her wisdom in raising these children, and now, even in death, the chance to become the man she'd always believed he could be. She'd prepared his family for him, teaching them about love and resilience and the importance of staying together no matter what challenges they faced. Thank you, he whispered to the stone, knowing that somewhere, somehow, Elena could hear him. The triplets stood together in their unconscious formation, Diego slightly in front, Sophia alert and assessing, Carmen gentle but strong. They looked like children who'd learned to depend on each other completely, and Marcus felt honored that they were even considering allowing him into their tight circle. We should get you back to St. Catherine's, Marcus said, checking his own watch. But first, let me give you my phone number. All three of you should have it in case you need anything at all while you're deciding. He pulled out 3 business cards, writing his personal cell phone number on the back of each. As he handed them out, he noticed how carefully each child tucked the card away, as if it was something precious. Will you call us tomorrow? Carmen asked hopefully, even if we haven't decided yet. I'll call you every day if you want me to, Marcus promised, for the rest of your lives, if you'll let me. As they walked together toward the cemetery gates, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. The unshakable certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, with exactly the people he was meant to love. Elena's final gift was still unfolding, but already he could see the shape of the future she'd made possible, a future filled with family dinners and homework help and art projects, with the laughter and chaos and deep satisfaction of a life lived for love rather than ambition. The broken businessman who'd knelt by Elena's grave an hour ago was gone, replaced by a man who finally understood what success really meant. And it was all because 3 brave children had chosen to approach a stranger and share their most precious memories of the woman who'd loved them both. The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Children's Home cast harsh shadows across the institutional green walls as Marcus followed Mrs. Helen Patterson down the corridor the next morning. His usual business armor, the tailored suit, confident stride, and commanding presence, felt inadequate in this place where success was measured not in quarterly earnings, but in the simple act of giving children hope for tomorrow. "Mr. Sullivan," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice carrying the professional warmth of someone who'd spent decades navigating the complex emotions of family reunification. "I have to admit, when Sophia, Diego and Carmen told me about meeting you last night, I was skeptical. We get a lot of people who make grand promises in emotional moments only to disappear when they realize the true commitment involved." Marcus nodded, understanding her caution. "I imagine you've seen your share of disappointments." "More than I care to count," she confirmed, stopping outside a door marked Conference Room B. But there was something different in their faces this morning. Hope, yes, but also a calmness I haven't seen since Eleanor's death. "They said you knew their mama." "Elena, she was—" Marcus paused, searching for words that could encompass the complexity of his relationship with Elena. "She was the love of my life. I lost her through my own poor choices, but I never stopped loving her." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "Elena mentioned you once during the adoption proceedings. She said the children's surname reminded her of someone who'd taught her that loving someone sometimes meant letting them follow their dreams, even when those dreams led them away from you." The casual revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Elena had connected the dots, had known these children shared his family name, and had chosen to honor his memory by keeping that connection alive, even while respecting the distance he'd created between them. "She knew?" Marcus asked quietly. "Elena was one of the most intuitive people I've ever met," Mrs. Patterson replied. "She had a way of seeing patterns and connections that others missed. I think she believed in destiny more than most social workers can afford to." They entered the conference room, where Marcus found himself facing a table covered with official documents, psychological evaluations, and background check forms. The bureaucratic machinery of child welfare was intimidating in its complexity, designed to protect vulnerable children from adults who might not have their best interests at heart. "Before we discuss your intentions regarding Sophia, Diego, and Carmen," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into her chair, "I need to understand your current situation. You're a successful businessman, unmarried, with no previous experience raising children. What makes you believe you're prepared for the challenges of single parenthood, particularly with 3 children who've experienced significant trauma?" Marcus had spent the sleepless night preparing for exactly this question. After leaving the cemetery, he'd driven straight to his office and researched every aspect of child psychology, trauma recovery, and single-parent adoption he could find. The business mind that had built Sullivan Innovations had turned its full attention to the most important acquisition of his life. "You're right to question my qualifications," Marcus began, leaning forward with the intensity he usually reserved for crucial negotiations. 12 hours ago, I was a workaholic bachelor whose idea of a family dinner was eating takeout while reviewing contracts. But I've spent all night thinking about what those children told me about Elena, about the life she built with them, about the values she instilled in them. He pulled out a folder he'd prepared, containing printouts of research, articles, notes on child development, and a preliminary plan he'd outlined. Elena taught them that families are built on love and commitment, not just biology. She showed them that consistency matters more than perfection, that being present matters more than being wealthy. I may not have experience as a father, but I have 15 years of experience building something from nothing, and I'm willing to learn everything I need to know to be the parent they deserve. Mrs. Patterson reviewed his research notes, her eyebrows rising slightly at the thoroughness of his preparation. "This is impressive, Mr. Sullivan, but parenting isn't a business plan you can execute. It's messy, unpredictable, and emotionally exhausting. These children have abandonment issues, grief trauma, and the complex dynamics that come with being triplets who've had to rely entirely on each other." "Then I'll get the best child psychologists money can buy," Marcus replied immediately. "I'll arrange for family therapy, individual counseling, whatever they need to heal. I'll modify my work schedule, hire household help, create the most stable environment possible." "And when that's not enough," Mrs. Patterson pressed, "when Carmen has nightmares about losing another parent, when Diego acts out because he's afraid to trust another adult, when Sophia tests every boundary to see if you'll abandon them like others have. What happens when your patience runs out and you realize that love alone isn't sufficient?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. These weren't hypothetical challenges, they were real obstacles that would test every aspect of his character and commitment. "Mrs. Patterson," he said finally, "3 days ago, I thought my life was complete. I had everything I thought I wanted: success, wealth, recognition. But when I met those children last night, when I saw the way they protected each other and honored Elena's memory, I realized I've been living half a life. They don't need me to be perfect. They need me to be present, consistent, and committed to their well-being above everything else." He paused, thinking of Carmen's musical laughter, Diego's protective stance, Sophia's wise questions. Elena spent 4 years proving that love could overcome any obstacle. She took 3 traumatized children and created a family built on trust and security. I may not be Elena, but I loved her enough to learn from her example. And I love those children enough to become whoever I need to be for them. Mrs. Patterson studied him for several minutes, clearly evaluating not just his words, but the conviction behind them. Finally, she spoke. "The children have requested to speak with you again before making their decision. Would you be willing to spend time with them here in a supervised setting so they can get to know you better?" "Absolutely," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Whatever they need." "Good. They're in the common room now, working on school projects. But Mr. Sullivan, I need you to understand something. These children have been let down by every adult who was supposed to protect them, with the exception of Elena. If you pursue this adoption and then change your mind, if you decide the responsibility is too much or that they don't fit into your lifestyle, it won't just disappoint them. It could destroy their ability to trust anyone ever again." The weight of that responsibility settled over Marcus like a mantle. He thought about his empty penthouse, his meaningless routine of work and solitary dinners, his growing awareness that all his achievements meant nothing without people to share them with. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I promise you, Mrs. Patterson, those children will never have to doubt my commitment again." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself in a bright, cheerfully decorated room, where a dozen children of various ages worked on homework and art projects. The institutional feel was softened by colorful artwork on the walls, comfortable beanbag chairs, and the obvious care someone had taken to make the space welcoming. He spotted the triplets immediately, sitting together at a corner table covered with school books and art supplies. Carmen was working on what appeared to be a watercolor painting, while Sofia helped Diego with mathematics homework. They looked up when he entered, their faces showing a mixture of nervousness and cautious excitement. "Mr. Sullivan," Carmen called out, abandoning her painting to wave at him. "You came back." "I promised I would," Marcus replied, walking over to their table. "How are you all doing today?" "We've been talking," Sofia said seriously, gesturing for him to sit in the empty chair they'd obviously saved for him, "about what it would mean to be a family with you." Marcus sat down carefully, hyper-aware that every word and gesture was being evaluated by three extremely perceptive children who'd learned to read adult intentions as a survival skill. "We have questions," Diego announced, pulling out a piece of paper covered with neat handwriting. "We wrote them down so we wouldn't forget anything important." Marcus smiled, recognizing Elena's influence in their methodical approach. "I'm ready for your questions." Sofia cleared her throat and read from their list. Question 1. Do you want us because we're your cousin's children, or because you actually like us as people? The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard, but he appreciated their need for honesty. "I want you because in one evening you showed me more courage, wisdom, and love than I've encountered in most boardrooms full of adults. The family connection means you belong with me, but even if we weren't related, I'd want to know you. You're remarkable people." Carmen beamed at his answer, but Sofia wasn't finished. Question 2. What happens if you meet someone you want to marry? Will you still want us, or will we be in the way? Marcus considered this carefully. "Any woman who would see you as obstacles rather than blessings isn't someone I'd want to marry. My priority is creating a stable, loving home for you three. Everything else comes second." Question 3, Diego continued. "What if we're not good at being rich kids? What if we don't fit into your fancy life? Then we'll figure out a different kind of life together," Marcus replied immediately. "Money should serve the family, not the other way around. If my current lifestyle doesn't work for you, we'll change it." The questions continued for nearly an hour, covering everything from bedtime routines to holiday traditions to their fears about being separated. With each answer, Marcus felt the invisible walls between them lowering slightly, trust being built one honest response at a time. Finally, Carmen set down her paintbrush and looked at him with Elena's expressive eyes. "Mama Eleanor used to say that the best families aren't born, they're chosen. She chose us, and we chose her. Now we get to choose again." "What are you choosing?" Marcus asked, his heart pounding as he waited for their answer. The triplets exchanged their silent communication one more time, a conversation of glances and subtle nods that excluded everyone else in the room. Then Sofia smiled, the first truly unguarded smile he'd seen from her. "We choose you," she said simply. "We choose to be a family." Marcus felt tears spring to his eyes as three children who'd lost everything chose to trust him with their future. In that moment, surrounded by institutional furniture and supervised by social workers, he experienced something he'd never felt in any boardroom victory. The pure joy of being chosen by people who mattered more than any business success ever could. 3 weeks into the transition process, Marcus stood in his penthouse living room at 6 in the morning, staring at architectural plans spread across his dining table. The sterile, minimalist space that had once represented the pinnacle of sophisticated living now felt like a museum, beautiful but utterly inappropriate for 3 children who needed warmth, safety, and room to grow. Dr. Sarah Chen, the family therapist Mrs. Patterson had recommended, had been clear about the importance of environment in helping traumatized children feel secure. Children who've experienced loss need spaces that feel permanent and welcoming, she'd explained during their first consultation. They need to see evidence that they belong, that this isn't just another temporary placement. Marcus had already begun the process of transforming his life to accommodate his new reality. Sullivan Innovations now operated under a restructured leadership model that distributed decision-making among his senior team, allowing him to work from home 3 days a week. His assistant Jennifer had become an invaluable ally, researching schools, recreational programs, and child-friendly restaurants with the same efficiency she'd once applied to merger negotiations. The penthouse renovation was just the beginning. Marcus had purchased the unit next door, planning to combine them into a sprawling family home with dedicated spaces for each child's interests. Carmen would have a sunlit art studio overlooking the lake. Diego would get a library with comfortable reading nooks and space for the science experiments that fascinated him. Sophia would have a study area sophisticated enough for her advanced academic work, plus a small office where she could organize her growing collection of community service projects. "Mr. Sullivan," Jennifer's voice came from the kitchen where she was preparing for the day's most important meeting. "The children should be here any minute. Are you ready?" Marcus straightened his tie, then immediately loosened it again. The triplets had made it clear during their supervised visits that they preferred regular Marcus to business Marcus, a distinction that still amused him. Today marked their first overnight visit, a crucial step in the adoption process that would test everyone's ability to function as a family unit. The elevator chimed, and Marcus heard Mrs. Patterson's familiar voice mixing with the children's excited chatter. His heart rate accelerated in a way that quarterly board meetings had never achieved. 3 weeks of supervised visits, family therapy sessions, and carefully planned outings had built a foundation of trust. But this would be their first time alone together as a potential family. "Wow," Carmen breathed as she stepped into the living room, her eyes wide as she took in the panoramic view of Lake Michigan. "It's like living in the clouds." "It's really high up," Diego observed, immediately gravitating toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Can you see the whole city from here?" Sophia, meanwhile, was studying the space with her characteristic analytical approach. "Where would we sleep, and do our homework, and keep our stuff from Mama Elena?" Mrs. Patterson smiled at the children's varied reactions, then turned to Marcus. "Remember, this is an adjustment for everyone. Don't expect perfection, expect learning opportunities." After Mrs. Patterson left, Marcus found himself alone with the triplets for the first time since that night at the cemetery. The magnitude of the moment wasn't lost on any of them. These children, who'd been failed by so many adults, were choosing to trust him with their most precious possession, their belief in the possibility of a real family. "So," Marcus said, clapping his hands together with nervous energy, "what would you like to do first? I thought we could order pizza and explore the space. Maybe start planning how you'd like your rooms arranged. Can we see where Mama Elena's things will go?" Carmen asked quietly. "We brought some of her pictures and her jewelry box, and Mrs. Patterson said you promised we could keep them with us." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. He'd spent considerable time planning a memorial corner in the main living area, a place where Eleanor's photograph could sit surrounded by fresh flowers, where the children could visit with their memories whenever they needed to feel connected to her. "Of course," he said gently, "I have the perfect place in mind." He led them to an alcove near the main windows, where natural light streamed in throughout the day. A comfortable reading chair sat nearby, surrounded by bookshelves that currently held his business texts, but would soon be filled with children's literature and Elena's favorite poetry collections. Carmen carefully unpacked Elena's framed photograph, the same image from the cemetery, showing Elena surrounded by the triplets during happier times. She placed it on the small table Marcus had prepared, then arranged Elena's jewelry box and a small potted plant beside it. "She loved daisies," Carmen explained as she positioned the pot. "We thought we could grow them here, like the ones at her grave." She'd love that, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. And she'd love knowing you have a safe place to remember her. Diego had wandered to the kitchen and was examining the state-of-the-art appliances with scientific curiosity. "Do you know how to cook?" "Because Mama Elena taught us to make pancakes and scrambled eggs, and Carmen makes really good grilled cheese sandwiches." Marcus realized with some embarrassment that he'd been living on takeout and restaurant meals for so long that his kitchen was essentially decorative. "I'm going to need you to teach me," he admitted. "I'm better at ordering food than making it." "That's okay," Sophia said pragmatically. "We can learn together. Mama Elena always said the best meals are the ones where everyone helps." As the afternoon progressed, Marcus watched the children gradually relax into the space. They explored every room with the careful attention of people who'd learned not to assume permanence, but also with growing excitement as they began to envision how their lives might unfold here. Carmen discovered the balcony and immediately began planning where she could set up an easel to paint the lake views. Diego found Marcus's small library and spent an hour examining his business books, asking surprisingly sophisticated questions about economics and entrepreneurship. Sophia, meanwhile, had appointed herself as the family's practical planner, making lists of everything they'd need to make the space truly livable. "We'll need different food," she announced during their pizza dinner, consulting her growing list. "Kid food, not just fancy cheese and wine, and we should have board games for rainy days, and a first aid kit in case someone gets hurt." Marcus dutifully wrote down every suggestion, marveling at how quickly Sophia had assumed a caretaking role. Dr. Chen had warned him that children who'd experienced trauma often became hypervigilant about security and control, and he could see that pattern in Sophia's need to plan for every contingency. "What about rules?" Diego asked between bites of pizza. "Every house has rules. What are yours going to be?" It was a fair question, and Marcus realized he'd been so focused on the logistical aspects of adoption that he hadn't considered the daily governance of family life. His own childhood had been shaped by his parents' demanding careers and high expectations, leaving him with few positive models for the kind of warm, supportive home Eleanor had created. "Well," Marcus said slowly, "I think the most important rule should be honesty. We should be able to tell each other the truth, even when it's difficult." "What about chores?" Sophia asked. "Mama Elena said everyone in a family should contribute." "Definitely," Marcus agreed. "We'll figure out what makes sense for each of you." "And homework," Diego continued. "Education is important, but so is having time to be kids," Marcus replied, thinking of Dr. Chen's advice about balance. Carmen had been quietly listening to the rule discussion while creating elaborate designs with her pizza toppings. Finally, she looked up with serious eyes. "What about the rule that nobody leaves, even when things get hard or we make mistakes?" The question cut straight to the heart of the children's deepest fear. Marcus sat down his pizza and looked at each of them directly. "That's not just a rule," he said firmly. "That's a promise. Families stick together through good times and bad times, through mistakes and successes, through everything life can throw at them. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." "Even if we're not perfect kids," Carmen pressed, "even if we have bad dreams or get in trouble at school or miss Mama Elena so much that we cry." "Especially then," Marcus assured her. "Perfect families don't exist, Carmen, but committed families do, and that's what we're building here." As bedtime approached, the reality of their situation settled over all of them. The children would be sleeping in a new place, trusting Marcus to keep them safe through the night. Marcus would be responsible for 3 young lives, their comfort and security resting entirely in his inexperienced hands. "We usually stay together when we're scared," Sophia explained as they prepared for bed. "In new places, I mean, we push our beds close together so we can whisper if we wake up." Marcus had anticipated this possibility and had arranged 3 twin beds in the guest room, positioned so the children could see each other easily. He'd also left the door open and placed a nightlight in the hallway, creating a clear path to his room if they needed him. "I'll be right down the hall," he told them as he tucked each one in. "If you need anything at all, water, an extra blanket, someone to talk to, just call for me, okay?" "Okay," Diego whispered, though Marcus could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Okay," Sophia echoed, ever the protector, positioning herself where she could watch over her siblings. "Good night, Marcus," Carmen said softly. "Thank you for letting us try being a family with you." Marcus felt his heart constrict with overwhelming love for these brave children who were giving him the greatest gift of his life, the chance to be the father Elena had always believed he could become. "Good night, sweethearts," he replied, the endearment feeling natural and right. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we'll start planning the rest of our lives together." As he settled into his own bed across the hall, Marcus listened to the soft whispers of three children comforting each other in their new home. He thought about Elena, about how proud she would be to see her children taking this leap of faith, trusting in the possibility of love after loss. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus Sullivan fell asleep, not as a lonely businessman, but as a father, and it felt like coming home. 6 weeks after that first overnight visit, Marcus discovered that becoming an instant father to 3 8-year-olds was like learning to conduct a symphony while the orchestra was already playing. Every day brought new challenges that no amount of business experience could have prepared him for, and some days he felt like he was failing spectacularly at the most important job of his life. The morning that would test everything they'd built together started like any other Tuesday. Marcus had finally mastered the art of making 3 different breakfast preferences simultaneously. Diego liked his eggs scrambled with cheese, Sophia preferred oatmeal with fresh berries, and Carmen insisted that pancakes shaped like animals were the only acceptable way to start the day. He'd grown to treasure these chaotic breakfast routines, the way the children's chatter filled the previously silent penthouse with life and purpose. "Marcus," Sophia said, looking up from her perfectly organized school supplies, "we need to talk about something important." The serious tone in her voice immediately put Marcus on alert. Over the past month and a half, he'd learned that Sophia's important talks usually involved issues that required delicate handling. Concerns about their adoption timeline, worries about fitting in at their new school, or questions about maintaining relationships with friends from their old life. "Of course," Marcus replied, sitting down at the breakfast table with his coffee. "What's on your mind?" "It's about parent-teacher conferences next week," Sophia continued, consulting a schedule she'd written in her precise handwriting. "All the other kids' parents are coming, and we weren't sure. I mean, you're not officially our dad yet, and we didn't know if you'd want to come, or if it would be weird because the teachers might ask questions." The uncertainty in her voice broke Marcus's heart. These children, who'd shown remarkable resilience in adapting to their new life, still carried the deep-seated fear that their place in his world was temporary, conditional, subject to change. "Without warning, Sophia," Marcus said gently, "I wouldn't miss your parent-teacher conferences for anything. I'm your father in every way that matters, and I want to hear about how brilliant you all are at school." Carmen beamed at his response, but Diego looked troubled. "What if the other kids ask questions about why we suddenly have a different last name and live in a fancy building? Jenny Martinez already asked why we moved, and I didn't know what to say." Marcus felt a familiar surge of protective anger at the thought of his children feeling uncomfortable or different because of their circumstances. He'd grown fiercely defensive of their privacy and emotional well-being, learning to navigate the complex social dynamics of childhood in ways his own parents had never bothered with. "What would you like to tell them?" Marcus asked. "We can come up with answers that feel comfortable for you, that explain as much or as little as you want to share. "Can we just say you're our dad?" Carmen asked hopefully. "Because that's what it feels like now. You help with homework and make us laugh and remember to buy the good cereal. That's what dads do, right?" The simple acceptance in her voice nearly undid Marcus completely. Over the past weeks, he'd watched these children gradually let down their guard, allowing themselves to believe in the possibility of permanent family. But hearing Carmen casually refer to him as their dad felt like a milestone he hadn't dared to hope for. "That's exactly what I am," Marcus confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "And if anyone asks, you can tell them I'm the luckiest man in the world because I get to be your father." The school day proceeded normally until Marcus received a call that made his blood run cold. Lincoln Elementary's principal, Dr. Williams, was calling to inform him that Diego had been involved in a serious incident during lunch and needed to be picked up immediately. Marcus abandoned his afternoon meetings and drove to the school with his heart pounding, imagining every possible scenario from playground accidents to behavioral outbursts. He'd learned enough about childhood trauma to know that even well-adjusted children could have unexpected emotional reactions when their sense of security was threatened. He found Diego sitting outside the principal's office, his clothes disheveled, and his right hand wrapped in a makeshift ice pack. The boy's expression was a mixture of defiance and shame that Marcus recognized from his own childhood moments of poor judgment. "What happened?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside Diego's chair. "Tommy Richardson said something mean about Mama Elena," Diego muttered, his voice barely audible. "He said dead people don't count as real moms, and that we were probably lying about having a family now because nobody wants weird foster kids." Marcus felt white-hot rage flood through him, but he forced himself to remain calm. Diego needed support and guidance, not an adult having his own emotional meltdown in the school hallway. "So what did you do?" Marcus asked gently. "I punched him," Diego admitted, looking up at Marcus with fearful eyes. "I know violence isn't the answer, but I couldn't let him say those things about Mama Elena. She was real, and she loved us, and Tommy had no right." Diego's voice broke, and Marcus saw the 8-year-old boy beneath the protective facade, a child who'd been forced to grow up too quickly, who'd appointed himself guardian of his family's dignity and his sister's emotional well-being. "Oh, buddy," Marcus said softly, pulling Diego into a gentle hug. "I understand why you were angry. When someone insults the people we love, especially someone as special as Elena, it hurts in a way that makes us want to fight back." "Are you mad at me?" Diego whispered against Marcus's shoulder. "Are you going to send us back to St. Catherine's because I got in trouble?" The question revealed the fear that lurked beneath every interaction, every mistake, every moment of imperfection. These children had been abandoned so many times that they expected consequences to be permanent and devastating. "Diego, look at me," Marcus said, pulling back so he could meet the boy's eyes directly. "I'm never sending you anywhere. You made a mistake today. You chose fighting instead of getting help from an adult. But mistakes don't change how much I love you. They don't change that you're my son." Dr. Williams emerged from her office with a sympathetic but serious expression. "Mr. Sullivan, thank you for coming so quickly. I've spoken with both boys, and while I understand Diego's emotional response, we do need to discuss appropriate consequences for physical aggression." The meeting that followed revealed the complexity of the situation. Tommy Richardson had indeed made cruel comments about Elena and foster children, comments that reflected ignorance rather than malice, but had struck at Diego's deepest vulnerabilities. The school's anti-bullying policies required consequences for both verbal harassment and physical retaliation. "Diego will serve 1 day of in-school suspension," Dr. Williams explained, "and Tommy will be attending sensitivity training about different family structures. I'd also like to recommend that we arrange for our school counselor to meet with all three children to help them develop coping strategies for these kinds of situations. Marcus agreed to the counseling immediately, recognizing that his children needed professional tools for navigating social challenges he couldn't anticipate or solve with business logic. The drive home was quiet, with Diego staring out the window and clearly expecting prolonged punishment. Instead, Marcus stopped at their favorite ice cream shop and ordered 3 cones, 1 for Diego and 2 for his sisters, who would undoubtedly want to hear the whole story. "I'm not rewarding fighting," Marcus explained when Diego looked confused. "But I am acknowledging that you were defending your family's honor, which comes from a good place, even if you chose the wrong method." Back at the penthouse, Sophia and Carmen listened with wide eyes as Diego recounted the day's events. Marcus watched their reactions carefully, seeing how they processed their brother's protective instincts and the reminder that their unconventional family structure would sometimes draw unwanted attention. "What should Diego have done instead?" Marcus asked, turning the incident into a learning opportunity for all 3 children. "He could have walked away," Sophia suggested practically. "Or told a teacher," Carmen added. "Or asked Tommy how he'd feel if someone said mean things about his mum," Diego said thoughtfully, clearly considering alternatives for the first time. "All good options," Marcus agreed. "But here's what I want you to remember. You never have to defend your family alone. If someone says something hurtful about Elena or about your story, you can always come to me. I'll talk to teachers, principals, other parents, whoever necessary to protect you from ignorance and cruelty." The conversation that followed revealed how much the children had been carrying silently. Sophia confessed to worrying about their adoption timeline and whether other families might challenge Marcus's right to keep them. Carmen shared her confusion about why some classmates seemed uncomfortable with her enthusiasm about having a dad. Diego admitted to feeling responsible for protecting his sisters from questions and comments he couldn't always handle alone. "We're going to face challenges," Marcus told them honestly. "Our family was created in an unusual way, and some people might not understand or accept that immediately, but that's their problem, not ours. Our job is to be honest with each other, support each other, and remember that love makes a family. Not biology, not paperwork, not other people's opinions." That evening, as they worked together on homework at the dining table, Marcus received a call from Mrs. Patterson with news that would change everything. "Marcus," she said, her voice containing barely contained excitement, "I just got word from the judge. Your adoption hearing has been scheduled for next Friday. If everything goes smoothly, the children could legally be yours by the end of next week." Marcus felt his heart stop, then restart at double speed. After months of paperwork, home visits, psychological evaluations, and bureaucratic delays, they were finally approaching the finish line. "Did you hear that?" he said softly to the children, who had looked up from their schoolwork when they heard the serious tone of his conversation. "Hear what?" Sophia asked, though her expression suggested she'd already guessed. "Next Friday, we go to court. And if the judge agrees, you'll officially become Sophia, Diego, and Carmen Sullivan. Forever and legally." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Carmen's whispered, "Really, really," Marcus confirmed. "1 week from today, there will be no more uncertainty, no more temporary arrangements, no more questions about whether we belong together. We'll be a family in the eyes of the law and in every other way that matters." The celebration that erupted around the dining table was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. 3 children, who'd learned to be cautious with their hopes, finally allowed themselves to believe in a future that was certain, permanent, and filled with the love they'd found in the most unexpected place. As they danced around the living room, to music from Carmen's playlist, Marcus caught sight of Elena's photograph on the memorial table. For just a moment, he could have sworn he saw her smiling, proud of the family they'd all created together, the family she'd prepared with such care, the family she'd entrusted to love that had found its way across 15 years and through a graveyard on a stormy night. One more week, and they'd be officially complete. But in Marcus's heart, they'd been a family from the moment 3 brave children had approached a stranger at their mother's grave and chosen to trust in love one more time. The morning of the adoption hearing dawned grey and drizzly, with Chicago wrapped in the kind of persistent October mist that seemed to seep into everything. Marcus stood at his bedroom window, watching the city wake up below, while his stomach churned with a combination of anticipation and terror that no amount of business experience had prepared him for. In just 4 hours, he would stand before Judge Margaret Huang and formally request to become the legal father of 3 children who had already transformed his life beyond recognition. The paperwork was perfect. The home studies had been exemplary, and Dr. Chen's psychological evaluations painted a picture of a family unit that was not only functional, but thriving. Yet Marcus couldn't shake the fear that something would go wrong, that some bureaucratic technicality or last-minute challenge would tear apart the family they'd worked so hard to build. "Marcus," Sophia's voice came from the doorway, tentative but determined. "Can we talk?" He turned to find all 3 children standing in his bedroom doorway, already dressed in the formal clothes they'd carefully chosen for court. Sophia wore a navy blue dress that made her look older than her 8 years, while Diego had insisted on a tie that matched Marcus's exactly. Carmen had chosen a yellow dress that reminded Marcus painfully of Elena's favorite sundress, the one she'd worn during their last weekend together so many years ago. "Of course," Marcus said, gesturing for them to come in. "What's on your minds?" The triplets filed into his room with the careful coordination that marked all their movements, settling on his bed in their unconscious formation. Diego protective, Sophia analytical, Carmen hopeful. But this morning, Marcus could see anxiety beneath their composed exteriors, the kind of nervous energy that came from wanting something so badly that the possibility of losing it became almost unbearable. "We've been talking," Sophia began, her voice carrying the weight of serious consideration, "about today and what it means and what happens if the judge says no." Diego finished quietly, giving voice to the fear none of them wanted to acknowledge. Marcus felt his heart clench. Over the past months, he'd watched these children gradually learn to trust in permanence, to believe that their place in his life was secure. But the legal adoption represented the final barrier between their current happiness and true security, and the uncertainty was clearly taking its toll. "What would happen to us?" Carmen asked in a small voice. "If the judge doesn't think we belong together, would we have to go back to St. Catherine's? Would we be split up?" The questions revealed the depth of their continued vulnerability. Despite months of love, stability, and consistent reassurance, these children still carried the trauma of abandonment, the learned expectation that good things were temporary and loss was inevitable. Marcus moved to sit on the bed beside them, choosing his words carefully. "First, I need you to understand something important. Judge Huang isn't deciding whether we belong together. We've already proven that to ourselves and to everyone who matters. She's simply making our family legal on paper." He pulled out a folder he'd prepared weeks ago, containing letters of support. "From teachers, neighbors, Dr. Chen and Mrs. Patterson. Look at all the people who believe in us, who've watched us become a family and want to see that made official. The judge will see the same thing everyone else has seen, that we're meant to be together." But what if something goes wrong? Sophia pressed, her practical mind unable to let go of potential obstacles. What if there's some law or rule we don't know about? Marcus understood her need for concrete reassurance. Sophia's way of processing anxiety was to gather information, to prepare for every contingency, to maintain the illusion of control in situations that felt overwhelming. "Then we'll figure it out together," Marcus said firmly. "If there are delays or complications, we'll handle them as a family. But Sophia, I need you to hear this. There is no scenario where you three are going back to foster care. Even if something delayed the legal adoption, you're staying with me. Period." Diego studied Marcus's face with the intense scrutiny that had become his trademark when evaluating adult promises. "You mean that, even if it took months or years to fix the paperwork?" "I mean it completely," Marcus replied without hesitation. "You are my children, legally or not. This apartment is your home. That will never change, regardless of what happens in a courtroom." Carmen had been quietly listening to the conversation, while fidgeting with the small locket she wore, another gift from Elena that contained photos of all of them together. Finally, she looked up with the kind of devastating honesty that only children could deliver. "I'm scared that if we become officially yours, Mama Elena won't be our mum anymore. Like the papers will erase her or something." The admission broke Marcus's heart and revealed a fear he should have anticipated. These children had been caught between honoring Elena's memory and embracing their future with him, worried that legal adoption might somehow diminish the woman who'd saved their lives. "Carmen," Marcus said gently, "Elena will always be your first mom. The one who chose you when you needed her most, who loved you and taught you and prepared you to be the amazing people you are today. Legal papers can't change that history or make that love disappear." He gestured toward the memorial corner they'd created in the living room, where Elena's photograph sat, surrounded by fresh daisies and drawings the children had made. "Adoption doesn't replace Elena's place in your hearts. It adds my name to your story. You'll be children who were loved by Elena Rodriguez and chosen by Marcus Sullivan. That makes you incredibly lucky, not confused about who your real parents are." Sophia nodded slowly, processing this perspective with her characteristic thoroughness. "So we can love both of you, without having to choose?" "You can love both of us completely," Marcus confirmed. "Elena gave you roots, and I'm trying to give you wings. Together, we've all created something beautiful." The conversation that followed revealed months of accumulated fears and hopes that the children had been carrying silently. Diego worried about living up to the Sullivan family name, concerned that his fight at school had somehow damaged their chances. Sophia fretted about the financial implications of adoption, wondering if she should somehow contribute to household expenses to prove her worth. Carmen feared that her artistic dreams were too impractical for a businessman's daughter, that Marcus might eventually expect her to abandon creativity for more conventional pursuits. Marcus addressed each concern with the patience and attention he'd learned to bring to family conversations, understanding that these weren't simple childhood worries, but deep-seated anxieties born from years of instability and loss. "Listen to me, all three of you," he said finally, his voice carrying the authority that had built Sullivan Innovations, but tempered with the gentleness he'd discovered in fatherhood. "You are not on trial today. Your worth as human beings, your place in this family, your right to love and be loved, none of that is up for debate. Today is simply about making official what we all already know to be true." By the time they left for the courthouse, the children's nervous energy had transformed into something closer to excited anticipation. They'd spent the car ride reviewing the judge's questions Mrs. Patterson had prepared them for, practicing their responses and supporting each other through the formal process they were about to navigate. The family court building was an imposing structure of limestone and marble, designed to convey the gravity of the decisions made within its walls. As they climbed the steps together, Marcus felt the weight of the moment, not just for himself, but for the three children whose futures would be decided in the next hour. Mrs. Patterson met them in the hallway outside courtroom 12, her professional composure unable to hide her genuine excitement. "How is everyone feeling?" "Ready," Sophia announced, speaking for all of them with characteristic confidence. "Nervous, but good nervous," Diego added, unconsciously straightening his tie. "Like Christmas morning," Carmen said softly. "When you know something wonderful is about to happen, but you're afraid to believe it's real." Judge Huang was a small woman with kind eyes and a reputation for thoroughness that had initially intimidated Marcus, but now seemed reassuring. She'd clearly reviewed their case file extensively, asking thoughtful questions about the children's adjustment, their educational progress, and their emotional well-being. "Sophia, Diego, Carmen," Judge Huang said, addressing the children directly. "I understand you've been living with Mr. Sullivan for several months now. Can you tell me how that's been for you?" The children exchanged their familiar glance of silent communication. Then Sophia stepped forward as their unofficial spokesperson. "Your Honor, Marcus isn't just taking care of us. He's helping us become the people Mama Elena wanted us to be. He comes to our school plays and helps with homework and remembers that Carmen likes heart-shaped pancakes on Sundays. He's teaching us that families can be built on love instead of just biology." Diego nodded earnestly. "He promised us that nobody leaves, and he's kept that promise even when I got in trouble at school. He said mistakes don't change love, which is something we needed to learn." Carmen's contribution was simpler, but perhaps most powerful. "He makes us feel safe, Your Honor, like we can be kids again, instead of always worrying about what comes next." Judge Huang listened carefully to each response, occasionally making notes, but mostly observing the family dynamics that played out before her. Marcus watched her face for any sign of her decision, but her judicial composure revealed nothing. "Mr. Sullivan," Judge Huang said finally, "adoption is a permanent legal commitment. These children will be your responsibility financially, emotionally, and legally until they reach adulthood and beyond. Are you prepared for that level of commitment?" Marcus stood, feeling the weight of the moment and the eyes of his children upon him. "Your Honor, 3 months ago, I thought I understood success. I had built a company, accumulated wealth, achieved everything I thought I wanted. But I was living half a life, focused on achievements that ultimately meant nothing without people to share them with." He glanced at the triplets, seeing Elena's features reflected in their hopeful faces. "These children have taught me what real success looks like. It's Sophia's determination to excel academically while still caring for her siblings. It's Diego's courage in defending his family's honor. It's Carmen's ability to find beauty and joy even after experiencing loss. I'm not just prepared to be their father. I can't imagine being anything else." Judge Huang was quiet for a long moment, reviewing documents and considering testimony. When she finally looked up, Marcus saw something that looked remarkably like a smile. "In 20 years of family court, I've seen many adoption cases, but rarely have I seen a family that so clearly belongs together, regardless of the circumstances that brought them to my courtroom." She lifted her gavel, and Marcus felt time slow down. "The petition for adoption is granted. Sophia, Diego, and Carmen Sullivan, welcome to your forever family." The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo through Marcus's entire being. Around him, he was vaguely aware of tears, laughter, and Mrs. Patterson's delighted congratulations. But his focus was entirely on 3 children who were now legally, officially, permanently his own. They were finally home. 1 year after the adoption was finalized, Marcus found himself standing in the same spot where his life had changed forever. Beside Elena's grave in Graceland Cemetery, but this time he wasn't alone with his regrets and memories. 3 chattering voices filled the air as Sophia, Diego, and Carmen carefully tended to the wildflower garden that had become their family's weekly tradition. "The daisies are blooming better this year," Carmen observed, her artist's eye noting the subtle improvements in their carefully maintained memorial garden. I think it's because we started composting at home and bringing the good soil here. Marcus smiled, watching his daughter. The word still sent a thrill through him every time he thought it. Arrange fresh flowers with the same meticulous care she brought to her paintings. Carmen's art had flourished over the past year, her work now displayed not just on their refrigerator, but in the hallway of Lincoln Elementary, where her painting titled Love After Loss had won the district-wide art competition. Mama Elena would love how beautiful this looks, Diego said softly, placing a small stone he'd found on their walk through the cemetery. Over the past year, he'd developed a ritual of bringing Elena small gifts, interesting rocks, pressed leaves, drawings from school, as if maintaining a connection across the divide between life and death. Sophia was documenting their visit in the journal she'd started keeping, recording not just their weekly activities, but the family's growth and changes over time. "I've been thinking," she said, looking up from her careful notes, "maybe we should start a scholarship fund in Mama Elena's name, for kids who want to study social work but can't afford college." Marcus felt a surge of pride at his daughter's thoughtful suggestion. Sophia's natural leadership abilities had only grown stronger over the past year, channeled now into productive outlets like student government and volunteer work at the local animal shelter. Her idea about the scholarship fund was both practical and meaningful, exactly the kind of initiative Elena would have supported. "That's a wonderful idea," Marcus replied. "We could work with Elena's old college to set up something permanent." The conversation that followed revealed how much the children had grown, not just in height and maturity, but in their understanding of how to honor the past while building the future. They'd learned to carry Elena's memory with them as a source of strength rather than sorrow, integrating her lessons into their daily lives while embracing the new opportunities Marcus had provided. As they finished their garden maintenance, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary year that had unfolded since Judge Huang's gavel had made them an official family. The learning curve had been steep. He'd navigated everything from parent-teacher conferences to sleepover parties, from homework struggles to friendship drama, from growth spurts that required entirely new wardrobes to the complex social dynamics of elementary school politics. But somewhere along the way, the businessman who'd once measured success in quarterly profits had discovered a different kind of achievement. Success was Sophia's proud announcement that she'd been accepted into the gifted and talented program. Success was Diego's growing confidence as he learned to resolve conflicts with words instead of fists. Success was Carmen's delighted squeals when she discovered that the art studio Marcus had created for her had a skylight that filled the space with perfect natural light for painting. "Dad," Diego said, the title still relatively new but growing more natural with each use, "can we stop by the Sullivan Innovations building on the way home? I want to show Sophia and Carmen the new community center you're building." Marcus had made significant changes to his business priorities over the past year, shifting Sullivan Innovations' focus towards socially responsible technology initiatives and community development projects. The community center Diego mentioned was the company's latest venture, a state-of-the-art facility in the neighborhood where Eleanor had worked, designed to provide educational and recreational resources for families who needed them most. "Of course," Marcus agreed. "Though I should warn you, it's still mostly construction equipment and empty rooms." "That's okay," Sophia said practically. "We can use our imaginations to see what it'll look like when it's finished." The drive through the city provided opportunities for the kind of casual conversation that had become Marcus's favorite part of family life. The children pointed out changes in their neighborhoods, discussed plans for the upcoming school year, and debated the merits of various summer camp options with the comfortable ease of siblings who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. At the construction site, Marcus watched with amusement as his children examined every detail of the emerging building with the serious attention of seasoned contractors. Sophia asked informed questions about accessibility features and educational programming. Diego wanted to understand the building's green energy systems and sustainability measures. Carmen was most interested in the planned art spaces and performance areas where local children could showcase their creativity. "This is going to help so many kids," Carmen said, standing in what would eventually become a bright, welcoming lobby. "Kids like we used to be, who need safe places to learn and play and feel important." The comment revealed how far they'd all come in processing their shared history. The children no longer spoke of their time in foster care with shame or sadness, but with the wisdom of people who'd emerged stronger from difficult experiences. They understood, in ways that many adults never learned, that challenge and loss were simply parts of life's texture, not permanent states to be feared or hidden. "Speaking of helping kids," Marcus said, "I have some news that I think you'll all find interesting." The triplets immediately turned their full attention to him, their identical expressions of curiosity making Marcus smile. Even after a year of family life, their synchronized reactions never failed to amuse him. "Mrs. Patterson called this morning," Marcus continued. "She's working with 3 new children, siblings who need placement, and she wanted to know if we might be interested in providing temporary foster care while their permanent family is located." The silence that followed was profound as the children processed this possibility. Marcus had discussed the idea of foster care with Dr. Chen months ago, understanding that his family's healing might eventually lead them to help other children facing similar challenges. But he'd wanted to wait until Sophia, Diego, and Carmen felt completely secure in their own place before suggesting they share their home and family. "More kids?" Sophia asked carefully. "Living with us?" "Temporarily," Marcus emphasized, "just until they find their forever families, like we found each other. It would be a way of paying forward the love and stability that Elena gave you, and that we've built together." Diego was clearly thinking hard, weighing the implications of such a significant change. Would they be scared, like we were? "Probably," Marcus admitted. "Foster care is frightening, especially for children who've experienced loss or abandonment, but they'd have something we didn't have when we first met, a family that understands what they're going through, people who know how to help scared children feel safe." Carmen was practically vibrating with excitement. "Could we teach them about treasure hunts and art projects and how to make Sunday pancakes? Could we show them that families can be made of love instead of just blood?" Marcus felt his heart swell with pride at his daughter's immediate impulse to share rather than protect what they'd built. Over the past year, Carmen had blossomed from a cautious, grieving child into a confident, generous person who approached the world with Elena's same instinct to nurture and include. "We'd need to talk about it more as a family," Marcus said. "Make sure everyone feels ready for such a big change, and we'd need additional training and preparation. Foster care requires specific skills and certifications." "But you think we could do it?" Sophia asked, her practical mind already working through logistics. "Help kids who need families? I think," Marcus said slowly, "that Elena would be proud of the people you've become and the family we've created together. And I think she'd love the idea of our home becoming a place where other children could discover that love and family are always possible, even after loss." As they drove home through the late afternoon traffic, Marcus reflected on the beautiful symmetry of their journey. They'd begun as strangers brought together by grief and chance in a cemetery, had learned to trust and love despite their fears, and were now strong enough to open their hearts to other children who needed what they'd found together. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table discussing the possibility of foster care, Marcus watched his children with wonder and gratitude. Sophia approached the topic with her characteristic thoroughness, researching requirements and asking detailed questions about the commitment involved. Diego focused on the emotional aspects, wanting to understand how they could help scared children feel safe and welcome. Carmen was already planning art projects and welcome gifts for potential foster siblings, her generous heart immediately expanding to include children she'd never met. "I have one more thing to share," Marcus said as they finished dinner. "Something I've been working on as a surprise." He pulled out a manila folder containing legal documents and handed it to Sophia, who had become the family's unofficial keeper of important papers. "What is this?" she asked, scanning the first page with growing excitement. "Paperwork to officially change the Sullivan Innovations mission statement," Marcus explained. "Starting next year, 25% of our company's profits will go toward creating Elena Rodriguez memorial centers in cities across the country, places where children in foster care can receive educational support, artistic opportunities, and family counseling services." The children stared at him in amazement, clearly understanding the magnitude of what he was proposing. "You're going to build Mama Elena centers everywhere?" Carmen whispered. "We're going to build them," Marcus corrected gently. "This is a family project. You three will help design the programs, choose the locations, and ensure that every center reflects Elena's values of love, acceptance, and belief in every child's potential." Diego shook his head in wonder. "A year ago, we were just 3 kids, waiting for someone to want us. Now we're going to help build places for other kids like us?" "That's what families do," Sophia said, with growing confidence. "They take care of each other, and then they help other people too." As they cleared the dinner dishes together, working with the easy coordination of people who'd learned to function as a team, Marcus felt a deep sense of completion. Not the ending kind of completion, but the satisfaction that comes from understanding that all the pieces of your life have finally fallen into their proper places. Later that night, after homework was finished and bedtime stories were read, Marcus found himself once again in the living room, where Eleanor's photograph still held the place of honor. The memorial corner had evolved over the year, surrounded now by family photos, children's artwork, and symbols of the life they'd built together. "Thank you," he whispered to Elena's image, understanding that her final gift had been even more profound than he'd initially realized. She hadn't just raised his children and prepared them for his love. She'd shown them how to love generously, how to find strength in vulnerability, how to build families based on choice and commitment, rather than obligation and tradition. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. The foster care training would require months of preparation. The memorial centers would demand careful planning and execution. The children would continue growing and changing, developing their own dreams and facing their own obstacles. But tonight, Marcus Sullivan was simply a father sitting in a home filled with love, surrounded by the laughter and dreams of 3 children, who taught him that the greatest success in life wasn't measured in what you accumulated, but in what you gave away. And what they'd given each other was infinite. The chance to love and be loved completely, the security of permanent family, and the joy of discovering that happy endings were really just new beginnings in disguise. 5 years after that fateful night in Graceland Cemetery, the Elena Rodriguez Memorial Center in downtown Chicago buzzed with the controlled chaos of children discovering their potential. Marcus stood in the main corridor, watching 13-year-old Sophia lead a group of younger foster children through an orientation tour, her confident voice explaining the various programs with the natural authority of someone who understood both the fear and hope that brought children to this place. "This is our art therapy room," Sophia was saying, gesturing toward the bright space where Carmen, now 13 and already showing signs of remarkable artistic talent, was teaching a painting class to 6-year-olds. "My sister Carmen runs workshops here twice a week. She knows what it's like to use art to process difficult emotions because she's been where you are. Marcus felt the familiar swell of paternal pride as he observed his children, no longer the frightened 8-year-olds he'd met by Elena's grave, but confident teenagers who'd transformed their own experiences of loss and recovery into tools for helping others. The center represented 5 years of careful planning, thoughtful implementation, and the kind of meaningful work that made Marcus's previous business achievements seem hollow by comparison. "Mr. Sullivan?" A small voice interrupted his observations. Marcus looked down to see Tommy Chen, age 7, who'd been living with their family as a foster child for the past 8 months. "Sophia said you wanted to talk to me about something important." Marcus smiled at the boy, who'd become such an integral part of their household. Tommy had arrived angry and defensive, convinced that every placement was temporary and every adult promise was destined to be broken. But the Sullivan family's patient consistency had gradually worn down his walls, revealing a brilliant, sensitive child with a gift for mathematics and a heart full of carefully guarded love. "I do want to talk to you, buddy," Marcus confirmed, kneeling to Tommy's eye level. "But let's wait for everyone to be together, okay? Family meetings include the whole family." The concept of family meetings had evolved over the years as their household had grown and changed. In addition to Sophia, Diego, and Carmen, his permanent children, who would always be the foundation of everything he built, Marcus and his family had provided temporary homes for 12 other children over the past 3 years. Some had stayed for weeks, others for months, but each had left their mark on the Sullivan household and taken with them the knowledge that love was possible even after abandonment. Diego appeared at Marcus's elbow, now 13 and tall for his age, carrying the tablet he used to document their foster care program for the State Oversight Committee. His role as the family's unofficial coordinator had emerged naturally from his protective instincts, channeled now into ensuring that every child who came through their home received the support and advocacy they deserved. "Everyone's ready in the conference room," Diego reported efficiently. "Tommy's social worker just arrived, and Carmen finished her art class early so she could be here." The conference room at the Memorial Center had been designed specifically for these kinds of conversations, child-friendly but dignified, with comfortable seating and windows that let in plenty of natural light. As Marcus entered with Tommy, he saw the assembled group that had become his extended family. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 60s but still fiercely dedicated to child welfare. Dr. Chen, whose therapeutic guidance had been instrumental in their success as foster parents. Carmen, wiping paint from her hands while beaming at Tommy with obvious affection. And Sophia, reviewing the notes she'd prepared with her characteristic thoroughness. "Tommy," Mrs. Patterson began gently, "you know we've been working hard to find you a permanent family, a forever home where you can grow up feeling safe and loved." Tommy nodded cautiously, his small hands gripping the arms of his chair. Marcus recognized the body language, the careful stillness of a child preparing for disappointment, the protective walls going up in anticipation of another loss. "Well," Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice warm with genuine joy, "it turns out your forever family has been right in front of you all along." She gestured toward Marcus, who stepped forward with documents he'd been preparing for months: adoption, and papers that would make Tommy legally and permanently his 4th child. "Tommy Chen," Marcus said softly, "would you like to be Tommy Sullivan? Would you like to stay with us forever, not as our foster son, but as our real son?" The silence that followed was profound. Tommy's eyes widened as he processed what he was hearing, his gaze moving between Marcus and the 3 teenagers who'd become his siblings in every way that mattered. "You want to keep me," Tommy whispered, as if afraid that speaking too loudly might break the spell. "Even though I'm not related to you like the others." Sophia, Diego, and Carmen exchanged glances. The same silent communication they'd perfected as children, now extended to include their understanding of Tommy's fears and hopes. "Tommy," Sophia said gently, moving to kneel beside his chair, "we weren't related to Dad either when we first became a family. Being related by blood doesn't make you more or less wanted. Love makes families, not genetics." Diego nodded earnestly. "Plus, you already are our brother. This would just make it official so nobody can ever take you away from us." Carmen, ever the artist, had prepared a special gift for this moment. She pulled out a painting she'd been working on for weeks, a portrait of their family that included Tommy right in the center, surrounded by all of them in a warm, golden light that reminded Marcus powerfully of Elena's enduring presence in their lives. "I painted this because you belong here," Carmen explained simply. "You've belonged here since the day you arrived and taught us that our family could keep growing and still have room for everyone." Tommy stared at the painting, tears beginning to track down his cheeks as the reality of what was being offered finally sank in. "I don't have to leave. I don't have to pack my stuff and go somewhere else. Never again," Marcus promised, his own voice thick with emotion. "You're home, Tommy. You're ours, and we're yours for the rest of our lives." The boy launched himself into Marcus's arms with the force of 5 years' worth of suppressed hope finally finding release. Around them, the other children joined the embrace, creating the kind of group hug that had become a Sullivan family tradition for marking important moments. As they held Tommy and let him cry out years of accumulated fear and longing, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them all to this moment. The scared, workaholic businessman who'd knelt by Elena's grave 6 years ago could never have imagined the life that was now his reality. A life filled with school concerts and soccer games, family dinners that required 2 tables, homework, sessions that resembled small classrooms, and the kind of joyful chaos that came from a household overflowing with love. The adoption ceremony for Tommy took place 2 months later in the same courtroom where Sophia, Diego, and Carmen had officially become Sullivans. But this time, the proceedings felt like a celebration rather than a test. The family had proven their resilience and commitment through years of successful foster placements, community service, and the kind of practical love that showed up in packed lunches, bedtime stories, and the infinite patience required to help traumatized children learn to trust again. Judge Huang, now preparing for retirement after 30 years on the family court bench, smiled as she addressed the packed courtroom. "In all my years presiding over adoption cases, I've rarely seen a family that so perfectly embodies the spirit of what adoption should be, not just the legal transfer of responsibility, but the creation of bonds based on choice, commitment, and unconditional love." She looked directly at Tommy, who sat between Marcus and Sophia in the front row, wearing a new suit and a smile that transformed his entire face. "Tommy Chen Sullivan, you are officially and legally part of a family that chose you not because they had to, but because they couldn't imagine their lives without you." The celebration that followed brought together an extended community that had grown around the Sullivan family over the years. Former foster children who'd found permanent homes returned to congratulate Tommy and share their own success stories. Teachers, social workers, and neighbors who'd watched the family's evolution gathered to witness another chapter in a story that had touched countless lives. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Marcus found himself once again standing beside Elena's grave, this time surrounded by 4 children, his children, who'd come to share their news with the woman whose love had made it all possible. "Mama Elena," Carmen said softly, placing fresh daisies on the well-tended grave, "we have a new brother. His name is Tommy, and he's really good at math and making everyone laugh when they're sad." Sophia added her own tribute. "We're running out of bedrooms in the penthouse, so Dad's looking for a bigger house." somewhere with a yard where kids can play and a kitchen big enough for family dinners with 12 people. Diego, now 15, and already talking about following in Elena's footsteps by studying social work in college, spoke directly to the headstone. "We're helping so many kids now, Mama Elena. The memorial centers are opening in 6 more cities this year, and we've helped place over 100 children in permanent homes." Tommy, still adjusting to the family tradition of cemetery visits, looked uncertain about what to say. Finally, he stepped forward and placed his small hand on Eleanor's headstone. "Thank you for teaching them how to love kids like me," he said simply. "Thank you for making them the kind of family that doesn't give up on people." As the afternoon sun began to set over the cemetery, casting long shadows through the oak trees, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. Not the ending kind of completion, but the deep satisfaction that comes from understanding that your life has unfolded exactly as it was meant to. Elena's grave was no longer a place of regret and loss, but a starting point, the sacred ground, where love had triumphed over abandonment, where family had been chosen rather than assumed, where 4 children had found their way home through the most unlikely circumstances imaginable. The memorial centers bearing Elena's name would continue, growing, providing support and hope for thousands of children across the country. The Sullivan family would keep opening their hearts and home to children who needed temporary refuge while permanent families were found. And somewhere, in the space between memory and possibility, Elena's legacy would continue expanding in ways none of them could fully imagine. As they walked back toward the car, Tommy slipped his hand into Marcus's with the casual confidence of a child who finally understood that he was safe, wanted, and permanently loved. "Dad," Tommy said, the title still new enough to make Marcus's heart skip. "When we get home, can you help me with my math homework? I want to calculate how many kids we could help if every memorial center helped 100 families find each other." Marcus squeezed his son's hand, marveling at how naturally Tommy had absorbed the family's values of service and mathematical problem-solving. "Of course," Marcus replied, "but first, let's stop for ice cream. New family members deserve proper celebration." As they drove through the city toward home, toward the larger house with the big kitchen and multiple bedrooms that Marcus had purchased to accommodate their growing family, he caught sight of Sophia, Diego, Carmen, and Tommy in the rearview mirror. They were engaged in animated conversation about plans for Tommy's room, summer vacation possibilities, and the foster child who would be joining them next month. These 4 remarkable young people, each carrying their own history of loss and recovery, had taught Marcus that love wasn't a finite resource to be carefully rationed, but an infinite force that grew stronger when shared. They'd shown him that families weren't biological accidents, but conscious creations, built daily through small acts of kindness, patience, and unwavering commitment. The businessman who'd once measured success in quarterly profits now understood that true wealth was measured in the laughter filling his car, the trust shining in 4 pairs of eyes that looked to him for guidance and security, and the knowledge that love, Elena's love, his love, their collective love, would continue rippling outward long after they were all gone. In the end, that was Elena's greatest gift. Not just the children she'd raised and loved, but the understanding that every act of love creates infinite possibilities for more love. The scared 8-year-olds who'd approached him at her grave had become confident, teenagers ready to change the world. The empty businessman had become a father whose greatest achievement was teaching children that they were worthy of love, regardless of their circumstances. And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, Elena Rodriguez smiled, knowing that her legacy would live on in every child who found family, every heart that learned to trust again, and every life touched by the simple but revolutionary idea that love, once freely given, never truly ends. The story that began with loss in a cemetery had become a testament to the power of love to heal, transform, and multiply across generations. And it was far from over, it was just beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.